Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex. It is our Monaco Grand Prix preview edition where we've actually got pre-practice on in the background as well. It's Thursday, of course, and you know Monaco always they have practice on the Thursday because Friday's their rest day. I wish we had Friday off here as well in Australia, but alas, that's not the case. Anyway, I'm Jawad as always, joined by Baden. We're already here. It's the Jewel in the Crown, and 6 races into the championship, and still all to play for.
Yeah, an interesting juncture that we reach once again. Monaco, it's a bit of an outlier to the rest of the season, so it's probably hard to say in the truest sense that Mercedes has the momentum coming here, because the circuit, as we've seen particularly last season, probably doesn't play to its strengths with that longer wheelbase, so they're going to be looking to maximise the points, and it's really on Ferrari to make sure in Mercedes' stead that it really cashes in, and to an extent Red Bull, after their issues earlier on in the season, they're looking really quite confident to perhaps jag another victory. And we don't need to mention Daniel Ricciardo. He's got unfinished business here.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about Dan the Avenger a bit later, but anyway, you could say this is the race, one and only race maybe on the calendar, where Red Bull and Ferrari are just already ahead of Mercedes in terms of being suited to this track. Mercedes coming into this race said that they're bloody worried, using their own terminology there. So it already goes to show you, yes, we're going to be looking out for Ferrari and for Red Bull at this race. And I guess for Sebastian Vettel, who won the race here last year, you know, it would be a definite boost to his points tally for the season. As we pointed out last week, he's gone 3 races now without finishing on the podium. He scored points, of course, in all of them, but you know, after those 2 wins that he took back-to-back at the start of the year, not being on the podium, he's obviously had all sorts of issues, a bit of bad luck, you know, and then ill strategy, you could say, as well from the Ferrari side. So we'll definitely be looking for him to get a good result, just so that points margin, I guess, stays single digit, you could say, because every time it gets double digit, you always have that concern that someone like a Lewis Hamilton, as soon as he gets on a roll, I mean, he's won 2 races in a row already after not having any mojo at all before the Baku race. So if he gets on a roll, keeps winning, and he could easily go on and win consecutive races, and then it's almost goodbye moon, good night moon for him. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one from the Ferrari perspective. But Red Bull too, as you said before, this is probably their best chance all season to get another victory easily. That is, we don't know what will happen. You know, there could be outcomes and circumstances that lead to another one later, but yeah, Daniel Ricciardo, the Avenger, you could call him. 2016 was to be his year. Didn't end up being the case because of that botched pit stop. But yeah, if he can put it on pole, this could be his race.
Yeah, I think we've really seen Daniel Ricciardo, when he gets it together around one lap, more often than not lately, we've seen Max Verstappen pips him in that third qualifying, but when Ricciardo really excels at a track such as a Monaco, he's pretty much unstoppable. So if he could, by any chance, get himself on that front row, I think it's going to be quite hard to go past him for the victory. That's assuming, of course, no botch pit stops and you can make a good start, but he just has that real confidence about him here, and what is essentially his second home race.
Yeah, you could say that for sure. And Verstappen going to Max Verstappen, that is, hasn't really had too much luck here, or you could say, I guess.
He crashed every year.
It's pretty much, exactly, yeah. And that one with Grosjean, I think, was probably the biggest of them all, where basically just brake tested Roman there. Poor Roman. We'll talk about him a bit later. Anyway, but yeah, Verstappen, can he turn around his fortunes here? It will be interesting to see as well. So yeah, going back to Dan, stick it on pole, or you know, even on the front row, it's pretty good. And we've seen Mark Webber having been quite successful around here in the past, and he, you know, basically Webber took the bulk of Red Bull's wins around Monaco as well. 3, I think, in total, or 2 in total. Yeah,
that lucky one in 2011.
Yeah, so you know, Aussies and Monaco seem to gel nicely together. So it'd be nice for Dan to have his 7th career victory here in Monaco, and I guess it's just being talked about as being a possibility. And I think, you know, if he can, it'll deliver. But I guess there's a lot of hype also around these hypersoft tyres, which make their debut this weekend as well. So we saw them in pre-season, of course, and at the end of last year during the Abu Dhabi test, just briefly. But pre-season, I guess, we couldn't really get a good read on them because the conditions were so cold. But record lap times is what we can expect around here in Monaco. Probably the fastest ever Monaco Grand Prix, barring intervention of the safety car, which no doubtly will happen. But it'll still be a one-stop race, which means it'll all just be about who's going to be quickest on those tyres.
Yeah, even a bit of talk, regardless of the fact that it's the most extreme compound there, and the extreme speed that we will see, that it could last for almost the balance of the race. I believe the Pirelli chief saying it could run for 77 laps, which is quite absurd to think that this durability exists in opposite to what we were used to probably 4 or 5 seasons ago, when you're getting around one lap and the tyres are completely cheddar.
Well, as you said, Monaco is one of those, it's an outlier, so I guess around here, you could have blue tack and it'll still last the race distance. So I guess it's just the surface of Monaco here. But if we see it around at other tracks, I think in Montreal next time out they're going to have the hypersoft tyre as well, and I don't know what other circuits for the rest of the season. We'll just have to check that one up for you. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes at other tracks as well as Monaco. But yeah, we should expect lap records to be smashed, and hopefully, a quick race, and just puts more pressure on the drivers to try and get more out of the laps. Who's the bravest, as you said before with Daniel Ricciardo? Are you brave enough to try and get that extra 10th or 100th out of the tyres or whatever? Explore the limits of your group. That's Monaco. We all think of Ayrton Senna's pole lap in 88, which was, one of the most breathtaking things you could see. So, and mind you, it's also the 30th anniversary of that this year as well, since he set that lap in 88. So, yeah, I guess that's what sort of encapsulates Formula One. That's what it's all about. And whoever nails that lap on Sun, all that sort of. Back to this year's race anyway. So between Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, 17 points in the championship after Hamilton's win in Barcelona. Both have won this race twice. Hamilton 2016, of course, inheriting that win from Ricciardo, yes. But also, seeing a replay of that race or some highlights of it today, just seeing Hamilton's tactics as well. We saw Ricciardo in the wet hold up behind Hamilton. He had the pace to pass, but Hamilton was being a bit tricky a bit naughty. Bit naughty, you could say, and just basically blocked him. I think did a double.
Ran him into the wall coming out of Portier.
The tunnel. Out of the tunnel, into the that section. Just almost runs him into the wall, and no wonder Dan wasn't too happy about that afterwards. But Vettel, he say that Monaco, if you take pole, you are guaranteed the win, but not always the case, because the last 2 races have been not won from pole position, and I guess we've talked about 16. Will he be allowed to win the race? Who knows? There's a lot of hypotheticals around that. So, as always, safety cars. Could there be weather in the air? I mean, it was raining earlier in the week there in Monaco. I'm not sure what the forecast is like for the rest of the weekend, but
based on what we're viewing presently, it's a little bit grey, a little bit misty. You can see over that mountain, a little bit of fog covering the scenery. Early that clears by
the guys like Renault and Haas, McLaren, they might have an opportunity for a podium here if things go awry for the guys at the top. So could this be the best opportunity that one of those guys have for getting a podium early on in the season? I've heard talk of, what if Fernando Alonso gets on the podium for McLaren?
How many times are we going to say, could this be McLaren's breakthrough for the last...
So him, actually, we'll touch on that in a second, but Kevin Magnussen's been in good form as well, and he's been on the podium before. So, Haas, I guess, they're a bit sheepish about their form this weekend. Kevin's saying that, they might not have that same advantage that they did for the last few races here, because, this not being a track that really favours a particular power unit, it sort of evens out the playing field a little bit. It just comes down to chassis, what the chassis is like, and this is where maybe guys like Toro Rosso, Sauber even could score some surprise points. Williams, forget about them because their chassis is not going to work whatsoever. We already seen Sergei Sirotkin have a bit of a moment coming down the pit straight. But, surprise results. We got to expect it this weekend.
Yeah, it just needs a little bit of intervention, a bit of opportunism, and really it's up to those teams to see that potential, whether it's drawing that line between being desperate or throwing it away. But the way that the season works, it's pretty ruthless, and you just don't know, again, when those opportunities will arise. So I think that outside of it, it's pretty hard to see any of those top three not prevailing on Sunday, to be honest.
Oh, for the win-wise.
As far as it comes to, maybe like jagging a top five, then absolutely. It's one of those rarities where anyone from that midfield is in the mix, and that extends all the way really down to Sauber.
Yeah, and Force India, probably the last team who were surprise podium finishes back in 2016. Sergio Perez getting that one back then. So, it shows you that it can happen. And, who knows? It's basically the points are there for who can survive the attrition, which will be pretty crucial. And Sauber, I guess, Charles Leclerc, being the first local driver, could he be the first local driver to score points since Louis Chiron back in 1950, the year that Formula One basically was invented? He finished on the podium that year.
Louis Chiron, he was about 52 at the time.
As well. So Leclerc, could he be the one who breaks the drought? I guess we had the last Monegasque driver who raced at the Monaco Grand Prix was Olivier Beretta back in 94, but didn't end up scoring there. So, and for Leclerc as well, his last race, we saw him score some points. He scored points in Baku, so, maybe 3 races in a row we could have points for Sauber, which would be quite something. We haven't seen them score points 3 races in a row for... I'm trying to think now.
2013, 2012, surely?
Maybe it could even be just 2012, back when they actually were podium contenders. So, it's going to be an interesting one for those guys. Williams, I basically have no hope for them this weekend. If they can both survive the first 10 laps, then,
It's like not even make it to the first pit stop.
Remember last year... you remember last
year
year with Lance Stroll basically crying for help, like Bambi or whatever. So, what's he learnt in a year?
Cut him some slack, though. To be fair, on sole race performances, he's not abysmal, but the car just offers nothing to anyone who ever hoped to set foot in it.
So, I feel for poor Sirotkin and Stroll in that case. And quickly on Brendan Hartley as well, I guess he needs a good result as well for his own confidence, but there's talk that, he's under pressure to retain his drive, and perhaps that he could be dumped as soon as the next race in Canada, with Red Bull looking perhaps to use Pascal Wehrlein, bring him back into F1 and have him replace Hartley. That would be quite harsh, you could say, the fact that I guess Hartley hasn't really put a foot wrong, but just hasn't really scored any, the thing is, Pierre Gasly got 4th in Bahrain. That's a bit of an anomalous result. So to use that as a yardstick, I guess, is a bit unfair. And for Toro Rosso, I've always said that this year's going to be more of a development year. I mean, they're just basically helping Honda develop that power unit for Red Bull for next year. And I guess the experience that Hartley brings from his sports car days, with fuel management, tyre management, hybrid energy management, all that sort of stuff, is actually valuable to the team and to Honda as well. So if the ruthless Dr. Helmut Marko looks to get rid of him pretty quickly, I think it'll be pretty hard done by.
Yeah, they need to look beyond purely Hartley being there as a points contender. It's what he offers for the longer term for Honda, and then just moving forward for Toro Rosso, just having that central, reliable driver who can complete a race distance at least. Sure, he's been a little bit scrappy here and there the last couple of weekends.
But his only retirement this year was not even his fault. It was his teammate that ran into him in China, and I guess for every other race he's been a bit anonymous, you could say. I guess the one big blemish probably was Baku qualifying, and that was it. But then he went on to score a point in that race anyway. So I guess he's just been a bit anonymous, you could say. He hasn't really stood out amongst the pack. And yes, because Honda and Toro Rosso, I guess, Honda power-wise are still down on the rest of the field. But, they're coming along. They've got the reliability happening now, and it's not as diabolical as the end of last year was for Hartley, when he basically retired from every race because of a Renault power unit failure. So, yeah, it's an interesting one to look at, but I certainly hope that he gets to see out the season at least.
Oh, at the very least, give him till the mid-year break, and by that point, if he's bringing up the rear, then maybe there's some merit to making change. But I think he's earned the right after what he's been through and the whole background to the story. It would be a pretty ironic and embarrassing postscript after being dumped initially and then finding his way in sports cars. He gets that reprieve, and then suddenly within a quarter or a third of the season he's back on his haunches again by the same ruthless sword of the one-eyed Cyclops. Then
basically,
that would be very much something you couldn't make up.
Sounds like a tale for a good narrative, that, the sort of the one-eyed Cyclops. But anyway, yeah, should be a great race, good weekend hopefully. I mean, last time out we were pretty exhausted by the end of Barcelona, or not even halfway through the race, and we felt like going to sleep. And a bit of a shock to the system actually finding out that the French Grand Prix is on an hour later than the time that we thought it would be on. It's after midnight basically. So yeah, it's these ones are taking a toll on us this year, you could say already, with that change in the time to have the races an hour and 10 minutes afterwards. But yeah, you were going to say?
Spare a thought for... We think it was bad enough through 10 o'clock New Zealand would have been midnight. Well, in this case, it's going to be 2 a.m. for those Antipodean neighbours there, if they're that keen on the Paul Ricard.
They're probably going to give up if they dump Hartley and then, call for Helmut Marko's blood, basically, having been dumped twice by him. So, yeah, we'll see how they go. But anyway, let's move it on into the digest then for this week. And, I guess some of the big news that came out was McLaren getting a new shareholder on board, and in the form of the Latifi family. Of course, Nicholas Latifi trying to make a name for himself in Formula 2. His father, another wealthy Canadian, far wealthier than Lawrence Stroll, it must be said as well. I didn't think that was possible, but it is. So he's injected 200 million euros into the McLaren group, the entire organisation, and basically he's taken that stake that was vacated by Ron Dennis. So the stake that Dennis had prior to being ousted, that's been taken over by the Latifi family now. So I guess you could say it is positive for them. They've found a new investor in them, someone who's got belief that perhaps, they will move forward in Formula 1 again. It's not, I guess, in the Stroll way, avenue to push the son into F1. They've already said that. I guess Nicholas is someone who's probably going to have more credentials before he gets into F1, unlike the Stroll boy. But
the Stroll boy.
The Stroll boy.
Like he's some evil benefactor who clearly just had the honeypot given and doused over him.
He looks like it. But anyway, I guess it's just this area, when you see kids walking up, kids around here, they're so entitled and all that. It's just... they're like little Lance Strolls running around. Anyway, let's move it on. But yeah, it's good news for McLaren because, as we know, they've not had a title sponsor for how many years now, since 2013. And the poor results that they've had over the last few years, everyone's wondered, is that going to do good for them in terms of attracting investors and sponsorships? So it's a pretty big win for them.
Yeah, I think in that interest of transparency, at least it's been set up that there'll be no, nepotism, you could say, there with that stake, opening a pathway for Nicholas Latifi there to come in. He's probably a way off legitimately belonging on the grid, and who knows, it could be like a Force India or, dare we say, a Williams once the credentials are there with Latifi's backing within McLaren to get the idea of how to run and perhaps take on a majority stake in one of those midfield operations, that it could be a bit more of a realistic proposition. But for now, I guess it's a bit of a win-win for both, and for McLaren, just a little bit of stability amid this time of uncertainty after cutting itself loose from the Honda era.
Yeah, exactly. Moving it on then, this is something that you talked about in your article this week is Baku is looking to exercise their break clause in their contract to negotiate a better deal with F1. So, of course, Baku probably Bernie Ecclestone's last will and testament, the fact that he rorted them for who knows how many billions of dollars.
Yeah, we must add Flavio Briatore.
And Flavio Briatore being a benefactor of all this. They've basically seen how Liberty are a bit more lenient on their customers and are looking to renegotiate the deal. So I'll get you to talk through this. Baku, are they really in the position to be posturing, as you use the term, with F1? I mean, we saw Silverstone do it last year, and I guess with rightly so, because they were basically heading towards bankruptcy and had no funding or whatever. So, they'd be hoping to secure a new deal before this one finishes in 2019, or this agreement will end at the end of next year, meaning next year could be the last Silverstone Grand Prix. So with Baku, I mean, why do they think they're in the position to be able to do this?
Obviously feeling quite confident, having played host to two of the more memorable events in recent seasons. They think they've got a bit of a leg up and a free pass there, but Liberty, they want to play their cards carefully. They don't want to go all out and just say, can we renegotiate from scratch because we've got some sort of historical benefit to the region and to you as a company. Liberty also needs to be careful to straddle that line between being seen to be really soft and also getting what it needs out of its own investment. And that probably is a separate case for a Silverstone. Liberty understands its value and historically from the origins of the World Championship. And you can see Silverstone, that previous deal was negotiated really amid crisis. It was off the calendar for all intents before 2010, and only a real last-ditch agreement was struck with the Ecclestone regime, and that was a loss-making leader, that's for sure. So they really are within their rights to have an alteration made. But for these other circuits that have only been around for 3 or 4 seasons, they're really rolling the dice if they think that they can go and say, can we get a free race or can we pay 20% of what we were paying previously?
Yeah, because especially when Liberty Media have got a long roster of races in the waiting. I mean, we heard about Miami potentially happening next year. There's Hanoi on the cards, Copenhagen as well, looking to happen. And then Germany, they want to look for a deal as well beyond next year. And I guess the current agreement that is with the Formula One group is that it's on a biannual basis not biannual, but every second year they'll have it at the Hockenheim, where the other year is supposed to be at the Nürburgring, but the Nürburgring, as we know, hasn't held a race since 2013, and whether they hold a race in the future again remains to be seen. But I'd certainly like to see a German Grand Prix back on there, whether they explore the idea of perhaps having a street race in Berlin or something at the Tempelhof airport that's abandoned. They do the Formula E there at the moment, but perhaps use a different circuit configuration as I've heard, or it's been talked about. But again, Hockenheim, Nürburgring, if they can revive those races, that would be great. But at the same time, we haven't really had the German Grand Prix or a classic German Grand Prix over the last few years to really stand out and say, that's an event that we've got to have on the calendar, sort of thing. So it's not one that I would miss, but it's one that it would be nice to see on the calendar. Kind of like Malaysia, Malaysia was good when it was there, but it's not one I'm going to miss while it's not there. But if they do end up bringing it back on the calendar, that would be great.
2012 in Hockenheim and 2013 at Nürburgring, probably the two most recent editions of the German Grand Prix, which really went to the wire.
Yeah, 2013 certainly, with Kimi and Seb having a great battle there at the end.
In 2012, we had Button and Vettel coming to blows, really, and that got quite heated.
And Hamilton being lapped like... yes, I'm not going to use the terminology that I was going to. It's a bit crude, but yeah, he was basically just being...
I think he was telling the guys after one lap that it was all not worth it, he should give up, and having his little hissy fit from memory. So there was that. But for Germany, you can see it's just always been a bit of a misnomer to think of the success that Mercedes has, Vettel's had, and off the back of the Schumacher era, that they just don't seem to embrace the sport as you would associate someone when they're so sharply within that sphere of domination over the past few decades.
Yeah, I guess post Schumacher, it's not really clicked for them. So, probably a lot of factors in to do with that. But it's not a race that, as I said before, would be missed, I guess, if it doesn't come to pass that they get a new deal. So, yeah. But at the same time, while we're on this topic, what are your thoughts on Liberty leaning towards street circuits more? Like, I like street circuits, but I don't want the whole calendar to be... I don't want it to turn into a Formula E type roster, basically, where we just go to street tracks. I mean, we've got to have those classic permanent tracks in there. Like, I didn't like how the calendar basically became a calendar of Tilkodromes back in the early 2010s. We were going to places like Korea, India, that just seemed like they were all one after another, and it almost seemed like we're going to the same race and the same outcome. So I don't want that either, but I don't want a whole roster full of street races. So where do we find the balance?
Yeah, probably for each continent, it's good for them to have one street race. Australia is a quasi-street circuit. It fills that hybrid breach between being a street circuit and just a conventional semi-permanent racetrack in one. Montreal also fits the bill there. Maybe America with Austin complemented by Miami. Then you look to Europe. Europe could really do with a legitimate street race. Monaco is probably unique in its own right, but one in the heartland of Europe would also be appropriate.
The Copenhagen one they're talking about.
Copenhagen or Berlin, that's right up its alley. And then who else? Asia. Asia's got, of course, Singapore, but there's always room for other events Hanoi.
Yeah, Hanoi will be a street race. So, exploring permanent facilities, perhaps they need to look at that as well for the future, because it's certainly a staple of Formula One, and it would just, it wouldn't be as great if it just all became street tracks, because I love seeing the vision of going through corners, of cars going through corners at like Spa or at Silverstone with Maggots and Beckett's. It's high speed, it's fast, it's swooping, it's the kind of stuff of, it's like a roller coaster basically.
Yeah, maybe cap it at a third. You wouldn't want more than 6 or 7 races where it's got the stop-start nature that you see with a Monaco. Of course, the spectacle's great. You more time seeing those cars at slow speed, but you want the pure nature of a car being completely untamed and just reaching maximum potential. That's what it's all about. Yeah,
exactly. But reaching maximum potential also requires good tyres, and Pirelli have come out, or it's being speculated that Pirelli are going to simplify the 2019 compounds. So we're going back to just 3 tyre compounds.
2010 and back.
Designated by soft, medium and hard tyres, but here's the catch, is that at every race they're going to be different. So even though we're going to call them soft, medium and hard, it'll be like, let's say Monaco, for example, where you've got hypersoft, ultra soft and super soft, but they'll be designated as soft, medium and hard. So
we could essentially get the third softest tyre this year representing the hard next year in any event as a notional, and the colours that could also become a hard.
Yeah, so kind of like they do in Supercars, I think, as well, or in MotoGP. But yeah, they'll only have 3 colours. So white's going to become your soft, yellow will be medium, and red will be hard. So it's basically flipping them around as they are currently. But I guess I kind of like having the colourful tyres. It's pretty trippy, in fact. But not having too many compounds, perhaps less complicated for fans. But then when we talk about each race, it's like, okay, well, this is what used to be the hypersoft tyre, and this used to be the medium tyre, but it's now the hard tyre and stuff like that. So that will probably confuse people, but at the same time, I do understand the logic in trying to simplify it there.
That's F1.
But from a marketing perspective, it's not a big win, because the colours. They sell product for Pirelli. But anyway, let's move it on now. And Indy 500, the other jewel in the crown, I guess part of the Triple Crown, is on this weekend as well. And we saw Ed Carpenter take pole position for the race, of course. Will Power, the Aussie, lining up third. Potential victor there if he can get it done. Danica Patrick in her final race before she retires from all motorsport, 7th, which is pretty good. Scott Dixon, the Kiwi, quasi-Aussie, you could say, in 9th. And Alexander Rossi, 32nd on the grid. So he has it all to do from the back there. He won the race, of course, in 2016. And I guess just looking back to last year's race and seeing Fernando Alonso in there, he was up in contention until, of course, a Honda engine blew on him and cruelled his chances. It is definitely one of those races that, even if you're not a big fan of IndyCar, it's worth watching because, it's the biggest race of the year for them. And quickly, while we're on, I guess, American motorsports, Roger Penske got announced earlier today, has been inducted in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So good on Roger there. So just goes to show you his power and influence in world motorsport, if not, just in America now with DJR Team Penske here in Australia, that, he's achieved quite a bit in his tenure.
Yeah, across so many categories. Do you think it's amusing to believe back in the 70s he even dabbled in Formula One and then, of course, made his name most prominently in IndyCar, and then probably the 90s, 2000s moved across to the NASCAR.
And he's won 100 races in NASCAR as well.
To be so successful across the board rather than just being a presence for his own marketing needs, you can see that he really puts in the full resources, and he's already made it work in Australia in 4 or 5 years, so wherever he goes he makes it a proper success.
He does. I mean, it's always mouthwatering to think whether he'd ever make it back into F1 or whatever, or look at making a tie-up perhaps with an existing team on the grid. I mean, that would just be a pipe dream, basically, seeing a big name like Roger Penske come back into F1 and try and battle it out with the established order. But anyway, while we're talking of Penske, let's move it on to supercars. And we had the Winton Super Sprint on over the weekend as well, which unfortunately you couldn't catch, which we'll touch on a bit later anyway. But big talking points, I guess, coming out of it. We talked about this at length last week, Nissan pulling the plug on the program. And what did they do? Karma come out and win their first race since 2016, and it was a pretty good win as well for Nissan and for Rick Kelly, who hadn't won a race since 2011. So we had Scott McLaughlin basically leading the entire race. Safety car comes out with 8 laps to go. With 10 laps to go, and then when the restart happened, it was 8 laps to go. Cold tyres, McLaughlin goes straight off at turn 1, and Rick Kelly inherits the lead, has Scott Pye on his rear, basically hunting him down. But in the end, Kelly, I guess with the determination, with the week that he's had with his team and his brother, I guess, it was an emphatic win.
I do remember saying, I think, to you on the Friday when they topped the practice sheets, how would the irony be here if they went and had a victory over the weekend? And lo and behold, that's exactly what they did, just despite those, I guess, locally or back in Japan, they've possibly jumped the gun a little bit, but you've got to take it in objectivity that this circuit, I guess, it's quite, again, unique, so they probably need to back it up.
Oh, yeah.
They had the good result, the good weekend at Phillip Island, but for what it's worth, it's still a bittersweet moment. Yeah,
it is, definitely, and I guess it's a circuit that they do a lot of testing at as well, so they've got that mileage under their belt. But what it was probably one of the feel-good moments of the year, you could say, for Nissan, and considering how deprived of success they've been in this tenure, it was nice to see them get it on the board, and perhaps, continuing into next year, perhaps the development that they can make on their own, even without the manufacturer support, could go away into them winning races regularly. And who knows, maybe if they continue the Ultima project beyond next year, and if it can maintain parity, they could potentially be championship contenders. But again, that's just all hypothetical.
If they were still continuing with that fossil into the 2020s.
Well, it's still all hypothetical, but anyway, for what it is, it was a great moment for them, and big boost this year, because at least they've got a race winning car under their belt if they can nail it at every circuit they go to. But the second race on the weekend, I guess it was a podium domination by the Kiwis, and it was a Kiwi 1-2-3. Fabian Coulthard, I guess, notching up his first win of the season. I guess a timely reminder that he's still there. Scotty didn't really get the best of starts and fell back into the pack, so Coulthard took the lead and basically just led the race from there. And Shane van Gisbergen had a good weekend despite his teammates not really being up there, so he was on the podium for the second time, and then McLaughlin racing his way back to third. So yeah, timely win for Coulthard there, I guess, for his confidence as well. But I guess we're still a long way off this championship, but you know, do you see him as a contender this year?
Oh, on the basis of the season to date, he's been a bit too inconsistent, but for his own point of view, this is a mini relaunch, and he just needs to take some momentum away from really what's been Team McLaughlin from the outset. And we saw last year what Coulthard was capable of when he was stringing those results together, so he just needs to get it right from the Friday and be top 5, top 3 if you can. Just like you see these guys, they're not always victories, but they're always there or thereabouts, and they have their scrapes, but they somehow get it together. Whereas you see guys like Coulthard, more often than not, they end up right down the field, and that's what's put them in this position where they've got to have a lot go right for the balance of the season.
Well, yeah, that's basically where I was going to touch on next with the off weekend, I guess, that couple of our contenders have had, had in Winton, and Jamie Whincup and David Reynolds both, they lost a stack of points. I mean, David Reynolds, I think, top 15th, I think, was his best result on the Sunday, you know, and then he was 25th in the Saturday race, so that was no good at all for him. And in Whincup as well, just, I guess, perplexed by the lack of pace that they've had, and I guess it's the second weekend in 3 events, because Phillip Island was the other one where he was nowhere with Triple Eight and Red Bull Racing or Red Bull Holden Racing Team, and then again in Winton. So yeah, they've lost. I think they're both 300 plus points behind in the championship now. And for Reynolds, I guess, you know, we talked about him at the start of the year, how this was the best start to a season he's had, and the fact that he's been on the podium. He won the race at the Grand Prix as well. He's in contention. So, you know, it kind of worries you with someone like Reynolds and Erebus, is because, you know, you thought that perhaps they could string it together, but, you know, one bad weekend, they might end up falling behind. But yeah, hopefully they use this little layoff we've got now until, I think it's the middle of June, when they head back to Darwin, if he can get himself back up there. But otherwise, yeah, it's a bit of a concern.
Yeah, well, McLaughlin, you see, gets a 5th and a 3rd, and he still retains a comfortable lead just because he kept himself clean, essentially. And these other guys who had howlers, they've really gone off the boil just like that, even though they've had pretty good campaigns to date. So it's really fascinating the way that the condensed standings works. You can go from being maybe 6th or 7th up to 3rd or 4th, and then down to 8th or 9th within the space of a couple of weekends in supercars, and then you can get another driver who mightn't have the best weekend, and yet they consolidate a lead at the top.
Yeah, record too. So he's got 40 career poles to his name now, and he's only 24 years old as well, and he's already 5th on the all-time pole record in supercars, just above Alan Moffat now, who had,
I think we mentioned a while back, just how clinical he is. He's just so clean, and leaves very little room for things to play into other people's hands.
Well, I guess that after the end of last year, I guess it was a big moment, the way that championship wrapped up so acrimoniously that it did, and the championship, over Alan Prost. So maybe that's the moment that McLaughlin needed to iron out those issues, and, you know, just came back this year a whole lot more mature than perhaps last year, even though last year he really didn't have many blemishes. Camp David Russell, has come over from Nissan, and he ended up being the fastest in that session in the Cam Waters number 6 car. James Moffat, of course, joins Chaz Moss and him, even though we were kind of sad that Matty Campbell couldn't pair up with Van Gisbergen again this season because of the World Endurance Championship initially, before Fernando Alonso got the calendar changed. But Bamba's still a pretty big name to have.
Yeah, you can see the interest. It's reciprocal. It's not just something of convenience. He seems keen for as much time in the seat as he can, and who knows if he shapes up along the Stanaway pathway, it could yet be a full-time option after he's had a couple of enduro campaigns under his belt.
Yeah, and while speaking of Stanaway, quick shout out, he finished in the top 10 for the first time as well this season after the torrid start that he's had to his full-time career. So perhaps, things are sort of, I guess maybe a leaf has been turned there, and I guess it's just been bad luck. He's been involved in a lot of first lap incidents, qualifying so low down in the field. It's so common to be caught up in the melees back there, and of course reliability on the Tickford side as well was sort of let him down. So hopefully from here on he can just move up the grid and qualify better and get those top 15s or top 10 results.
Yeah, I think it's always inevitable he'd be found a little bit out of his depth, just not having that other driver to rely on, that reference point. So I think that this season it's probably going to be one where if he can crack a top 5 and maybe a podium at any point, it's a pass mark, but it'll be 2019 when we can really judge whether he's...
Came into the category as well. It took him a year to get himself settled and whatnot. So, now, he's won a race, of course, and been on the podium, pole position. So, yeah, it'll be the same with Stanaway, who's had a pretty, I guess, well-credentialed pathway into this category. And we'll change categories again because we haven't really talked about MotoGP this much this season, but there's quite a bit to talk about already. 5 races into the championship with Marc Marquez, I guess, unassailable 36-point lead after the French Grand Prix over the weekend. And what's surprising, it's just been so inconsistent with the season, and Marquez has won 3 races in a row, finding that form that he had back in 2014 when he won the first 10 races.
No, his rivals just keep tripping over each other. Second time in a row that his competition, they're maybe looking like they're going to make a bit of a fight, and they just have some sort of friendly fire, or they just fall off of their own volition, and Marquez can just close up the book after maybe 10 laps. It's quite amusing, really, when you see that it's almost been an effortless season to date for him. He hasn't had to really do a whole lot, and he's halfway to a 5th title in 6 seasons.
Well, as was said before, in regards to McLaughlin, watershed moment, I guess, for Marquez, Argentina, and that clash with Valentino Rossi, the fallout from that, perhaps that was a watershed for Marquez too this season, who likes to, as we know, live it on the edge and whatnot. But that form that he's been showing, 3 race wins in a row. I don't think he's won consecutive races since 2014. You look at 2015, I guess that was Lorenzo's championship, but 16 and 17, even though he won those titles, he didn't win 3 races in a row at any stage in those seasons. So, yeah, for Marquez to do that, I guess it's pretty significant. But as you say, the rivals keep tripping over. Andrea Dovizioso, back-to-back DNFs now for him, which was pretty, I guess, sad to see because he was up there last year. He won the first race this year in Qatar, and we thought he would be the main rival again for Marquez, but good to see anyway that he's renewed with Ducati for another 2 seasons. A lot of silly season news, of course, in MotoGP land because a lot of those big names were out of contracts with their factories, but a lot of them have re-signed with their current teams. Rossi Vinales staying at Yamaha, Alex Rins staying at Suzuki. Both the Espargaro brothers are staying put at their respective teams with KTM and Aprilia. But the big name, I guess, that's moved is Johan Zarco. I guess he was hot property. He's moving to factory KTM team next year, which is pretty big, I guess, because Tech 3 as well, they're moving over to KTM as a customer too next year. So for Zarco to be on that factory bike is pretty significant.
You can see he's clearly trying to position himself as that nucleus for their bid over the next 2 or 3 years to be title contenders. But he's made that bold leap, and clearly he's got a bit of confidence from what he's seen on that development side, and also a bit of talk that maybe in 2 years it'll be a lucrative option for a Marc Marquez if he can see the potential within that operation.
Yeah, they've said that all along this season. But yeah, for Zarco to be leading his own factory, I mean, he's been the top Yamaha guy all season, and that's pretty big to say, even though he's on a customer bike versus the factory Yamaha effort. So, we know his potential, and it's only a matter of time before he wins a race. I mean, it was pretty cruel, actually. He crashed out of his home race. He was on pole position. He had the weight of a nation on him, but yeah, just ended up crashing out, which was pretty sad. So hopefully he wins a race or two this season, which would be great.
Yeah, that's the little moment for them where it can go from being something tangible in the sense that they think they might have it, to the real belief being there, and just the rounded polish that you see in those riders. Some of them put it on the edge and they make a silly mistake, and you see someone like a Marquez now, how infrequently he makes a mistake now. He plays those percentages
even though he just, I don't know, rides the bike like one of those Texas Bulls or whatever. He's basically hanging off it every corner he goes through. Don't know how he does it, but it's superhuman, those efforts. But going back to the silly season, I guess there's only one big name left on the table who hasn't signed a deal yet, and that's Jorge Lorenzo. And I guess, it's a big decision that he's got to make this next contract, because it's, he always used to like to rub it in Valentino Rossi's face, but I guess who's laughing now, you could say, because Lorenzo thought by going to Ducati at the time that he did, that he would be the leading guy and he would have been the guy to win the championship and everything, but Dovizioso showed him up, and Lorenzo's just been nowhere. He's not won a race since he moved to Ducati. I think he scored maybe 2 or 3 podiums last year, and this year, he's just looked so far off, where Dovizioso is even. So,
well, it mirrors very much Valentino Rossi's tenure there about 5 seasons ago.
Yeah, it does mirror it, but I just find it's a bit, there's a lot of hubris in it, because Lorenzo thought that he was going to Ducati at a better time and that he would do better than Ross. He actually probably said it himself that he would do better than Rossi did it on the Ducati as well. So, yeah, it's just a bit of karma coming back to Lorenzo. But anyway, the option's there for him to stay at Ducati on a cut price deal, of course, because he's not worth, I think, 19 million or something that they were paying him. Compared to the peanuts that they were giving Dovizioso. Dovizioso's got the better deal now because he was the guy who almost led them to a championship. So does Lorenzo stay there on a cut price deal, or Suzuki is the other option? They're looking for him to replace Andrea Iannone, who I guess for the second time in his career was going to be replaced by Lorenzo there after he got replaced at Ducati.
Oh, I think following his compatriots' pathway in F1, you'll go to Suzuki just as they look like they're coming good, and they'll just absolutely falter, and that'll be the end of his competitive career.
Yes, but Fernando Alonso, I hope, actually wins something before he retires, whereas Lorenzo, I couldn't really give a rat's. But anyway, so yeah, that's a big move yet to happen, I guess. Does he go to Suzuki? Does he go to Ducati? Does he stay at Ducati? And I guess if that Ducati seat frees up, I guess it gives Jack Miller an opportunity to perhaps end up at the factory team. And, the last time we had an Aussie on a factory Ducati, well, we know what happened there. So, yeah, that could be the potential there for Jack Miller to step up. And he's had a really good year, you could say, so far. He's been far more consistent. He's been finishing races. He's been scoring points inside the top 10.
Yeah, 4th at Le Mans.
Yeah, and then, of course, he had pole position in Argentina as well. And if it wasn't for that faux pas with the start of the race, he could have actually won the race as well, we say. So, yeah, Miller's been real good. And mind you, he's on a year-old bike as well. He's on last year's Ducati. So the fact that he's doing, bit more, delivering more consistent results than Danilo Petrucci, perhaps will keep him in Ducati's mind for next year if Lorenzo does decide to jump ship.
Yeah, he does look like he's a complete package. He just needs that opportunity, but I think he's lost that aggressive edge, which saw him bin it more often than not in previous seasons.
Yeah, which, I guess got him that tag, the jackass or whatever. So the fact, he's a lot more consistent this year is really good too. And Danny Pedrosa too as well. There's talk now that if he's moved on by Repsol Honda, we could see Moto3 champ from last year, John Mir, come into the team as well, where he's currently in Moto2 this year. So that would be interesting to have a young guy just plucked and put onto the bike instead of getting someone who's already in MotoGP to come through. Like we always thought, perhaps that would be Jack Miller's, I guess, birthright to have ended up on the factory Honda, but it wasn't to be the case. But he could be on a Ducati instead. Yeah,
it could be either. You never know. In years to come, he could yet emulate Casey Stoner and do both. He might be the chosen one at Ducati and then at Honda down the track, but things have a strange way of working themselves out, and maybe for Miller he's reclaimed his fate by moving here, and he might have that opportunity within 12 months. And for Pedrosa, he's been at that Repsol Honda team now for 13 or 14 seasons, so you can see that he hasn't had the ultimate prize yet. So as much as he's had his real lifetime share, you could say, many times over of misfortune, at the same time there has to be a moment where they look to the future.
As well as too, and he, constantly getting injured and whatnot. It's just heartbreaking to see all the time that, he's a little guy too, so imagine how he's pretty tough to be able to take all that. And speaking of tough, we had another classic, excuse me for the pun, moment there from Cal Crutchlow over the weekend, having that nasty high side crash in qualifying, which put him in hospital overnight. And then the next morning, he's cleared by the doctors to come and race. And he was actually racing pretty competitively too in the bottom part of the top 10. So pretty brave stuff there from Cal Crutchlow. And these motorcycle guys, like proper gladiators they are these days.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot to stop them. They've really got to be at the point where they're completely knocked out to stop them from riding. Casey Stoner, when he fractured his ankle a few years back, went on and finished in 4th place. And you see other guys with maybe questionable collarbones or shoulders or any kind of ailment, and they refuse to give in to the pain until the result's been had.
Well, if you dislocate anything these days, they just pop it back into place, and it's like, there you go, you're on your bike. Whereas, not to take the piss out of footballers, but it's a lot more painful for them to go back on the field to play, and I guess they don't have access to the same the same adrenaline or the morphine or the pain, whatever painkillers they get in MotoGP in football. So if you dislocate something, that's it, you're out basically for the rest of the game. So for those guys, it is like watching modern day gladiators. But anyway, let's leave it at that, and I guess wrapping things up with our sporting moments of the week. And this is where I come back to you, because for me it was actually your marathon on the weekend. My moment of the week. Yeah. Another personal best result for you. I guess not the conditions you would have been hoping for, but still finishing 9th in your class, I believe, overall. Still a great result. And, I guess next year there's always to look forward to with this one. But I guess this being the time of year it is here in Victoria, you can't really expect much from the weather, can you?
Yeah, it just didn't conspire right. On the morning with the headwind, it was pretty much constant from the start. As soon as they delayed the start for a few minutes for the bus to clear the course, the wind picked up off the start, which is on a little bit of a climb out of a car park, and that set the tone for the rest of that morning, and did slow everyone down. Wasn't just myself, so everyone's times were off the estimate. So it was all a bit to the scale, you could say. It was more about the results, and maybe for ninth there was a lot of depth there this year, so maybe not quite the top 5 that had been thought about beforehand, but still a very satisfying time in those conditions against that class of field. They were very strong, and has to be looked at more so on I guess gap to first from last year. It was definitely condensed compared to where it was 12 months ago. Yeah,
so perhaps, from what you've said, a more challenging race it is, this one, the Great Ocean Road. So, for Melbourne, I guess, in the coming months, perhaps you could see more improvement for yourself as far as overall time is concerned. Great effort regardless anyway. So,
Yes,
yeah, that's probably, my sporting highlight amongst so many others that was on the weekend. So, yeah, the fact that you went out and did that as well and in those conditions too, it's hats off to you. So, yeah, a few apart from... putting up your own name for your own moment of the week. If there was anything else that stood out to you, feel free to share it.
I would honestly nominate something, but I was so absent from the orbit of sport through that weekend that I can't really think of too much there. It's been a very, very much a blur. This week's even flown by, just getting straight back into the work regime for both of us. So it was an oddly absent weekend when it came to motorsport or football or anything like that. So I don't even have a nomination. I don't think at this point. It's
just nominate the Melbourne Storm Manly fight or whatever. The puncher.
I didn't see a moment of that footage.
the punch.
Collingwood won. That was good. I didn't see a moment of that.
Oh, well, we'll see this weekend then with plenty on. I'm sure you'll be able to come up with something for next week. I dare you to get 2 things for next week then in that case. But anyway.
I dare say between Monaco, Indy and all the football and whatnot that we'll have some little good strands to dissect.
Yeah, hopefully plenty for next week as it is. But anyway, we'll leave it at that for this evening, of course, as we reach the dying stages of Monaco practice anyway for the first session. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week to wrap up the race, of course, and see what carnage unfolds, as always, in Monaco. So take care and enjoy the weekend.
Till then.